Some hungers don't live in the stomach, they live in our patterns. If you have ever promised yourself never again and still found your hand in the pantry or maybe in the fridge, you're not weak, you are wired. So, today on this episode of The Mindful Living, we are exploring how the brain learns, repeats, and thankfully can relearn. I'm your host Sana, and my guest listeners knows this from both sides. Years of looking fine on the outside while feeling trapped inside cycles of binge eating. After trying everything from therapy to calorie math, her turning point came when she stopped blaming herself and started understanding the unconscious brain that kept the habit alive with millions quietly struggling. This conversation is about science, compassion, and practical repatterning. Listeners, you are safe here. So let's get curious, not cruel, not judgmental. So, listeners, meet my lovely guest, Amber Abila. Amber, welcome to the show, and it's really an honor to have you here with us.
Hi, Sana. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Absolutely. Amber, first of all, I mean, this is something that I have personally actually dealt with. Binge eating, specifically when I have been on very strict diets. And more than the physical implications, I'll be very honest to admit that I have struggled emotionally, mentally, because after that binge eating, I got into a rabbit hole, this, vicious loop of anxiety and judging myself and my choices. Then it kind of translated into physical implications as well. So I personally very much connect with that. So, in plain language, Amber, what's the exact habit loop behind binge eating? And where does neuroplasticity give us the leverage to change it?
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that with me because you're definitely not alone in that. And it's
Yeah.
something that so many more people struggle with than we could ever imagine. I remember the first time that I shared with my best friends that I was going to be a coach on binge eating. One, they were a little surprised because they thought, oh, I didn't even know you struggled with that because I kept it so secretive. But also, they said, me too. I've also struggled with it too. So
Mhm.
even my closest friends, we didn't really talk about it with each other. So, as you
Mhm.
mentioned, I tried a lot in my journey to stop binge eating, all of the traditional routes of going to therapy and um, learning about protein and carbs and trying to take a bubble bath or call a friend, like all of these traditional things that were taught, but
Mhm.
nothing's really working for me. And so, what I started researching was our habits. And how our habits work is
Mhm.
anytime we do something over and over again, our brain starts to automate that behavior to try to make it so it doesn't require as much thinking energy. And that's something that can happen a lot of times after people start dieting. Because what happens is when you start dieting, your
Mhm.
brain and body check in, and it's like, wait a second, I haven't gotten enough important calories for the day. There must be a famine happening on Earth. And starvation has been our biggest threat to survival for a long time. So, because of that,
Mhm.
our brain and body check in and they say, okay, we must get as much food as we possibly can while it's available to us.
Mhm.
So, as we start eating the food, then our brain gets the reward of the food and it starts
Mhm.
to recondition this habit in of, oh, eating a lot of food must be a good thing. We're not
Mhm.
starving anymore. We're finally getting maybe some of the nutrients too. And so then it creates a habit loop around this. And that's where our urges and cravings will come in, is it starts to think, okay, every time we're in this situation, every time I'm in this around this food or this person, I'm going to send out a strong urge to do this habit because this is what we've always done. And now we're on autopilot and we don't have to think about it so much.
Wow. Wow. I never thought about this, that, so much happens actually inside our brain and the body. And one thing which I should, appreciate here, Amber, like how you de-shame this by making it mechanical, not moral. And after your answer, I think listeners will, at least press us, huge sigh of relief that yes, this is something that can be kind of, manageable, doable to rewire. So yeah, thank you. And many people, they white knuckle urges. So, Amber, biologically, why does willpower fatigue lose to nervous system dysregulation? And also, what's a concrete regulation tool that works in the moment?
Yeah, so this is a thing that a lot of people will make a mistake with when they're trying to get through these urges that they've conditioned.
Mhm.
It They first will get really, surprised by it. So they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I wanna eat right now." And then they'll get very angry and frustrated at it. They'll think, "I just want this to go away. I am so angry that I'm dealing with this still." And when that happens, that makes it so much harder to sit with, and it makes it so we have to willpower our way through because we've now created all this additional emotion on top of the urge itself of frustration and surprise and anxiety. So, what urges are? Urges are this emotion of over desire. So, it is too much desire for something. When we desire food when we're hungry, that is a normal level of desire. Like, we're supposed to desire food as living beings. But when we start desiring food when we're no longer hungry or to the extreme, that is when we are having this over desire come into play. So, what we can do for that is I have this guided audio that helps people with their urges called a Stop a Binge Before It Starts audio that you can have in the show notes. And in this audio, I walk people through first a couple of reminders about what our urges are. So, urges are
Mhm.
three things: they are harmless, they are powerless, and they are meaningless. Harmless meaning they are just thoughts that we are having that are
Mm.
creating sensations in our body. So, meaning they cannot hurt us. We can handle any sensation. Sometimes it literally feels like we're gonna die when we have an urge to binge.
Yeah.
Don't eat right then. And so I would literally remind myself, I'm not gonna die right now. It's not gonna hurt me. This is just a thought going through my head that is creating some sensations in my body. I can handle it. Then they're powerless, meaning they can't make us act. So one of my favorite examples of this is if someone were to sit on their hands and you were to think about touch my nose. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter how long you sit here and try to think to yourself, touch my nose, touch my nose, touch my nose. You're not going to do it until you give your brain the okay. Okay, let's lift up my hands from under my legs and touch my nose. So we can do that actually like at a meal, sitting on our hands to kind of give us that tactical reminder that we're never out of control. But just as a example too that we are always in charge, we always have control, that there is no thought that's just going to force us to act either. And then finally, urges are meaningless, meaning, yes, sometimes we do want to evaluate our urges and look at why we might be having them. But at the end
Mm.
of the day, too, because they've become so habituated, some people, and this is what they do in therapy, is they'll spend like years looking at their past and their history and where could have all this come from. And it's not that that's not useful, but it's just not necessary. And the more we focus on the urges and thinking about it and um, explaining it to ourselves,
Mm.
the more
Mm.
the urge can grow because then we're just continuing to think about it. So sometimes it's just helpful to almost look at it as, this doesn't really have any meaning. It's just my brain going on autopilot in this way based off what I've conditioned into it. Then another thing I like to
Mm.
take people through is through visualization. And I do visualization a lot in my coaching. I integrate aspects of that as well as hypnosis to help
Mhm.
people address their unconscious brain, which is the part of their brain that says, "Well, I know what to do, but I'm just not doing it." The I'm just not doing it, that's our unconscious brain coming into play. And visualization is what essentially helps us create a blueprint for our unconscious brain to follow. They've done studies where people have imagined playing piano for an hour a day, and then they have actually played piano for an hour a day, and the results were same in their improvements in piano, where even though they just visualized it, it actually gave them a similar result. So we know we could use that to our advantage then of imagining ourselves getting through urges and also imagining the positive results that will come from that. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll tell themselves chapter one of the story.
Hmm.
Chapter 1, I eat the food, it tastes delicious, the end. But that is not the whole story. The
Mm-hmm.
whole story is you start eating the food. It might taste good for the first, couple of seconds, but even if we're being honest with ourselves, the binge eating
Uh-huh.
isn't even fun because we're so out of control, we're so frantic, we're not even paying attention to how the food tastes. So that itself is not even fun, but the whole
Mm.
rest of the day, the evening, the couple days after are really miserable after we binge. And we want to remind ourselves of that to tell ourselves, okay, this is the truth of what actually happens and give our brain that clear image so it can help remember that in the moment.
Hmm. That is very, very interesting, Amber. Very, very interesting, especially um, I think, if I can give my perspective from here after understanding specifically around the urges, like, the adjectives that you used, harmless, meaningless, I think it kind of really gives a signal to our brain and our self that this is not overpowering me. I still have that control in there. So, yeah, I think that's also a very interesting aspect of the urges here.
Yeah.
And now moving on to the data. Like if I would like to understand what exactly happens, like we always rely on data to look at what exactly is happening. So what metrics matter, Amber, when rewiring, like you mentioned around visualization and then hypnotherapy, like frequency, intensity, time to urge, recovery time, and how quickly do this usually shift when the brain starts learning a new pathway or a new way to look at it.
Yeah, that's a good question. My program that I take people through to help them stop binge eating is
Mm,
6 months, and so I usually find that that is the perfect amount of time. Some
mm,
people I was just on a consultation the other time. She's like, "That feels like a long time," and I'm like, "Well, when you consider how long you might have had these eating habits for, most
mm,
people are not coming to me surely the binge eating for 6 months themselves, it's been like a 10, 20, 30-year struggle that they're dealing with, and so 6 months is actually changing in a very quick way, but
yeah.
we're so used to seeing quick results from other diets of,
Mm,
"Okay, I'm just gonna starve myself for a week, and then I'll lose 5 pounds as quickly as possible," or, "I'm gonna take Ozempic or another GLP-1,
mm,
and the weight will just drop off fairly effortlessly." So, from all of the quick fixes, we're taught quick results, but quick results don't last. And when we're doing this deeper brain change, it does take a little bit of time. And that's not going to say it's going to take forever, but we need to address underlying beliefs about how we think binge eating is pleasurable and how we think it's giving us joy and our different
mm,
beliefs about the types of food we're eating. And that takes a little bit of time to uncover and also just to create the awareness around that and to even think about, well, what do I think about food? How does my brain operate on the day to day? And building that awareness is always the first step of looking at that. So that's usually what we work on first in the program. So then we can actually start taking those bigger actionable steps towards stopping binge eating.
mm. And Amber, one thing really like I'm curious about. So, quite of times, the reason behind binge eating could be just more than controlling weight or diet or just for health reasons. There could be some emotional triggers also which are leading to binge eating. So how do you work around that? Because what I think that it would definitely need a holistic approach in there, not just from the perspective of science or whatever is happening, like rewiring our brain. So how exactly you approach that?
Definitely. There are a lot of aspects to stopping binge eating, your mindset being one of them. But as far as emotions go, one of the
Mm,
biggest key skills I teach people around emotions is not how to change their emotions, but how to sit with them. What a
mm,
lot of people will teach you is what to do instead of, feeling sad or how to get out of sadness. Well, you should journal, you should do some deep breaths, you should um watch your favorite TV show, distract yourself. It's not that that's necessarily wrong, but that's not the core key skill that we need to be able to handle any emotions. So what I teach people is that everyone feels the 50-50 of life, 50% positive, 50% negative. No matter
Mm.
how much money you make, how much someone loves you, any of these other external things that we think make us happy, there's always going to be a time in life where we feel some of these like more negative emotions of sadness, frustration, anger, anxiety. Those things will still come up because we're human and that's part of the
Yeah.
human experience. So if instead of trying to, excuse me, escape out of all the emotions, we were
Mm.
just to sit with them and say, I'm safe to sit with these emotions, it wouldn't be such a big deal. Then we could just go throughout our day. We're feeling sad and that's okay. We're feeling anxious and that's okay. And this is exactly what natural eaters do is they
Mm.
just sit with their emotions. They don't need to change it all the time. They just feel sad and they don't go to the ice cream because they are okay with feeling the sadness.
Mm. I love that. I love that analysis, Amber. Yeah, and uh, you argue that belief in identity work beats stricter food rules. And then, on the other hand, critics would say that soft and people do need structure. So, what does the evidence and your experience show about identity level rewiring versus tighter or stricter restriction?
Yeah, so when someone is changing their identity, it's going from thinking I am a binge eater to I am a normal eater, or
Mm.
I'm someone who doesn't struggle with food. And our identity is like the core of how we view ourselves. It's like a lens or like glasses of how we view the world. So if we believe that we are a binge eater, then when we get an urge, we think, well, I'm a binge eater, so I'm just going to binge. When
Mm.
there's cakes or cookies around, we think, well, I'm a binge eater, so then we overeat on it.
Yeah.
But if instead we are to look at that situation and we believe that we're normal and we believe that we're a normal eater, then when we get in that situation, we can just say, what would a normal eater do right now? If I were someone who didn't struggle with food, how might I interact with these things? And so that
Mm.
it gives you some insights around how you might want to act instead and starting to step into that new version of you so you can be the type of person who does just eat whatever they want, but in amounts that feel good to them, and who does stop when they're full because you're starting to become this new person. Now, as far as
Mm.
structure goes, we talked a lot about the mindset.
Yeah.
I do think having structure is important when people are stopping binge eating. One of the most important structures that I found for people is just eating 3 meals a day. 3 meals a day is what almost everyone in the world does. They have breakfast, lunch, dinner to some degree. And
Mm.
it helps us, one, start to be able to eat with other people again. If you're someone who's used to skipping meals or like saying no to dinner with friends, this helps us like get into that regular schedule and be able to have those connections with people again. But it
Mm.
also creates predictability within our body and our hunger and fullness hormones, where our
Mhm.
body can predict that food is coming in now at a certain time. And that
Mm.
creates a lot of safety for us of knowing like we're never more than a couple hours away from our next meal. And so I don't need to overeat right now because food is coming again soon. But what a lot of people who are struggling with binge eating tend to do is eating tends to be all over the place at all hours of the day.
Mm.
Sometimes they eat a smaller meal, but then they're super hungry. So then they have a giant meal midday and then they skip dinner because they're not hungry for dinner. Or, it just gets a little bit chaotic. So I find when people can start eating a solid breakfast, lunch, and dinner that contain four things: protein, carbs, fats, and fiber in the form of a fruit or vegetable. That really
Mm.
helps to start regulate things and makes it easier to not have these extreme binges anymore.
Absolutely, Amber. I so much agree with you on this. So much agree with you. And it will take time. I mean, as you mentioned, like 6 months standard. I think structure is definitely needed, like that consistency and that discipline. And I think a promise to ourselves that we have to do. Um, and it's obviously including our mindset as well. So it is not difficult. It may be a bit overwhelming initially, but it is doable.
Mhm. Right, and a lot of people have some fear around eating those normal meals again. A lot of
Yeah.
times why we do, like, have chaotic eating is because 'cause we're scared that if we eat bigger meals at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then we're gonna gain weight or, we're not gonna be healthy or we're gonna have all the things happen to us that we don't want to happen. But the truth is sometimes including an extra 300 calories a day will prevent someone from having a 3,000 calorie binge later on in.
Mm. Mm.
So sometimes people do feel like when they start working with me, they're like, oh, I'm eating so much more food at like my meals at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But that's because they're not having these giant binges anymore on all the snack foods, which we don't even register. We feel like we're not eating that much. But when you really look at it all out, it is a decent amount of calories and food that we're eating when we're binge eating. So don't be afraid to have more real whole foods at your meals, especially to help you feel full and satisfied, because that will help prevent a lot of the binges happening from later on the day. It's not the only solution of eating more, but it definitely can help your body feel safer because it's actually getting the nourishment and calories that it needs, which again is our most basic need and also our brain's biggest fear around its threat for survival is food and water. So if we can make sure that our brain feels safe, that we have enough, then it doesn't feel the need to go to the extremes with food so much.
Definitely, definitely. I think that's a very important takeaway for all of our listeners. And Amber, before we wrap up, if our listeners they would like to connect with you and also get access to all the resources that you are sharing, what would be the best way?
Yeah, so the best place to find me, you can go to my website, theconfidenteater.org. There is where you'll be able to find my guided audio to stop a binge, which will help walk you through any of these strong urges and cravings you have using this psychological based approach. And there you can also find links to my Instagram, which is The Confident Eater. I also have a podcast of my own called Become a Confident Eater that I put out a new episode every Thursday for.
Super, super. And listeners, what I'll do is I'll have all the links and details in the show notes. So just refer to them along with this episode on your favorite podcast platform. And I think this particular episode has been so, like, personally, it has been so fruitful for me because now I know that I am not, alone, or I am not the strange one out there. It
Yeah.
happens with anyone, anybody, and there is a way out there. And Amber, thank you so, so much for bringing this perspective, bringing your insights, the research, the science, and the mindset behind binge eating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sana.
So, listeners, if this conversation has stirred something within you, please remember that your brain isn't broken. It is brilliant at learning what you repeat. The same wiring that kept you stuck can be rewired gently and consistently. So, track patterns, regulate before you negotiate with food, and get real support. You are not alone and you are not a project. You are a person learning a new language of safety. So, thank you so much for tuning into this episode, listeners of The Mindful Living. Be kind to your nervous system this week. It is listening. Thank you.